You had toast this morning. Maybe you didn't think about it. You spread something on it, ate it in under a minute, and moved on with your day. But that soft golden thing on your plate took your species over 10,000 years to figure out. And the real answer is far stranger than someone got hungry. Bread feels obvious now. Flour, water, heat. Done. But nothing about that process is obvious. Wild wheat does not want to become bread. It wants to scatter its seeds into the wind and disappear. Somewhere, a group of humans looked at a grass seed too small to fill a stomach and decided it was worth collecting. That decision changed everything that came after it. Start at the beginning. Not with farms, not with ovens. Start with hunger and grass. Around 23,000 years ago, at a site called Ohalo, 2 on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, archaeologists found something that shouldn't have survived. Charred seeds, grinding stones, traces of wild barley and wheat burned into permanence by an ancient fire. Researcher Ain't Sneer and her team studied these remains and found starch granules stuck to the grinding stones, granules that showed clear signs of having been ground and possibly heated. This was thousands of years before farming existed anywhere on Earth. These were hunter-gatherers, people who moved with the seasons, who had no fields, no ownership of land, no concept of a harvest, and they were already grinding grain into something like flour. Why would you do that? Whole seeds are already edible. You can chew them, digest them, survive on them. Grinding takes time. Grinding takes tools. Grinding takes patience that a hungry person doesn't usually have. But grinding does something whole seeds can't do on their own. It breaks the seed's tough outer shell. It unlocks starch that your body can actually absorb. A ground seed feeds you more efficiently than a whole one. Someone, somewhere, noticed that. Not through science, not through planning, through trial. Through generations of small, almost accidental experiments repeated until they became habit. Picture it: a hot stone near a fire, wet grain, dropped or spilled or set down absent-mindedly. A thin paste forming where heat met moisture and starch. It cooks, it hardens slightly. Someone picks it up, curious, and eats it. It doesn't taste like much, but it fills something in the stomach that raw grain never quite could. This is likely how the first flatbread happened. Not intention. Proximity. Heat, water, and grain sitting close enough together for chemistry to do what humans hadn't yet learned to do on purpose. Here's where the story gets genuinely strange. For thousands of years, this early bread-like paste stayed flat. Dense. More like a cracker than what you'd recognize as bread today. The soft, airy texture you associate with a fresh loaf required something else entirely. It required something alive. Wild yeast lives almost everywhere. On grain husks, in the air, on human skin. It doesn't need an invitation. If you leave a wet mixture of flour and water sitting out, wild yeast will find it, and it will start to feed. As it feeds, it releases carbon dioxide. Tiny bubbles. The dough begins to rise, slowly, almost imperceptibly, without anyone touching it. Somewhere in ancient Egypt, likely by accident, a batch of grain paste sat too long before cooking. Maybe someone got distracted. Maybe there was a delay before the fire was ready. Whatever the cause, that dough had time to catch wild yeast, ferment, and rise. When it finally hit the heat, it didn't come out flat and dense. It came out lighter, softer, full of air pockets. Something new. Egyptologist and food historian Delwyn Samuel, who studied ancient Egyptian baking through residue analysis on preserved bread loaves, found evidence that Egyptians were producing leavened bread by at least the 3rd millennium BCE. Her analysis of microscopic structures in fossilized bread samples revealed air pockets consistent with yeast fermentation, not just simple flatbread. Egypt didn't just eat bread. Egypt built an early food industry around it. Bakeries have been found near ancient construction sites, feeding the very workers who built the pyramids. Think about that for a moment. Some of humanity's most staggering architecture was built on the strength of fermented grain and water. Not a metaphor, a literal fact. Workers needed calories, and bread was the most efficient way to deliver them at scale. But why did it spread so fast once it existed? Why didn't bread stay a regional curiosity? Because bread solved a problem that had nothing to do with taste. It solved storage. Grain, once dried, lasts far longer than fruit, meat, or most vegetables available to early humans. It can be stored through a harsh winter. It can be transported without spoiling in days. Once humans learned to farm grain deliberately, roughly 10,000 years ago in the region known as the Fertile Crescent, they weren't just securing food, they were securing time. A surplus of bread meant a community could survive a season without a fresh hunt. It meant fewer people needed to spend every waking hour searching for food. Anthropologist Ofer Bar Yosef, who researched the origins of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent, argued that this shift toward grain cultivation was one of the central turning points that allowed permanent settlements to form. People didn't need to keep moving. Grain, and the bread made from it, gave them a reason to stay. Is that surprising? It should be. You probably think of bread as comfort food, a side dish, something you have with dinner, almost an afterthought next to the main event. But bread wasn't a side dish in ancient life. Bread was infrastructure. Bread was the reason cities could exist at all. Here's the twist most people never think about. The invention of bread may not have been the goal of early farming. It may have been the other way around. Some researchers now believe that the desire for stable grain supplies, potentially to make fermented foods and early beer, was a driving force behind agriculture itself. Grain wasn't just food, it was raw material for transformation. Bread, beer, both come from the same basic chemistry of grain, water, and time. Humans didn't stumble onto farming and then invent bread as a bonus. Bread, in some form, may have been one of the reasons farming was worth the enormous effort it required. And farming was enormous effort. Clearing land by hand, planting by hand, weeding, watching, waiting through entire growing seasons with no guarantee of success. Compare that to hunting and gathering, where food could often be found the same day it was eaten. Why would anyone choose the harder path? Unless the payoff was worth it. Unless what waited at the end of that labor, a warm, rising loaf that could feed a family and be stored for the future, was worth reshaping an entire way of life around. So the next time bread seems unremarkable, remember what it actually represents. Not a snack, not a side, a 10,000-year experiment in patience, chemistry, and survival, run by people who had no idea what starch molecules or wild yeast even were. They didn't need to know the science. They only needed to notice what worked, remember it, and do it again. That's the quiet detail hiding inside your morning toast. It isn't just breakfast. It's the end result of a chain of observations stretching back to a hot stone by the Sea of Galilee, an Egyptian bakery near the pyramids, and thousands of anonymous hands that pressed grain and water together long before anyone called it a recipe. You had toast this morning. Maybe you didn't think about it. But somewhere behind that simple bite is one of the longest-running experiments your species ever ran, and you're still eating the results of it every single day.